Good afternoon. I am Nancy Brynelson, one of two co-directors for statewide literacy in the California Department of Education, and we're thrilled that you're here with us today. We will be talking about integrated reading and writing as a part of the California Literacy Roadmap. You might have noticed that the title of our webinar changed slightly. We did say Best First Instruction and Intervention. We're going to be focusing mainly on Best First Instruction, and we're going to be talking all the way from transitional kindergarten through grade 8. So with that, I would like to introduce my co-director, Dr. Bonnie Garcia, and she has a few words.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon. As Nancy shared, I'm Dr. Bonnie Garcia, Statewide Literacy Co-Director with the California Department of Education. This is the 8th session and more to come of our 25-26 Literacy Informational Webinar Series. For those who have attended our other webinars, thank you for returning. For those who are attending the first time, welcome. We appreciate everyone's commitment to improving and accelerating literacy outcomes for students across California and ensuring that our students are reading and that they're writing proficiently by 3rd grade and beyond. This is a collective effort, and we're grateful to have you with us on this very important mission. I also want to thank all of our presenters and panelists today. We appreciate all of the knowledge, the wisdom, and the resources that you will share with us, and to our CDE staff who have supported and made this series and today's webinar happen. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Nancy.
Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate that. And Shanna Burkholz-Vasquez will be joining us shortly. She's kicking off another webinar in the early education division. So it's a busy place. And another round of thanks to our ASL interpreters, without whom we couldn't provide access to all. I'd like to introduce our illustrious panel. We're so thrilled that you're all here. I'll start with Dr. Michael Hebert, someone I have been following for a number of years. He is a professor at UC Irvine and also the director of the California Writing Project at UC Irvine. He's in the School of Education. He's done research in the area of special education, reading and writing, and how they work together. Thrilled to have him here today. Also, Hallie Yap should be here. Dr. Yap will be joining us shortly, I am sure. And she is Professor Emerita at CSU Fullerton, where she was in the Department of Teacher Education. There she is. Wave and say hello, Hallie. And she spent many years as co-director of the CSU Center for the Advancement of Reading and Writing. That Hallie and I were part of a team that wrote the ELA, ELD framework, and Hallie gets most of the credit for that. And then I'd like to introduce my other friends, Roberta Ching, also known as Robbie. She's Professor Emerita at CSU Sacramento in composition and working with multilingual students in their first year and beyond at Sacramento State, and from whom I've learned a great deal. I've learned from everyone. And her colleague, our colleague, Deborah Boggs, they will both be talking about some opportunities to integrate reading and writing, particularly for English learner students, even long-term English learners in middle school. So we're excited to hear about all of that. So thank you. These are our wonderful presenters, and you will be hearing from them shortly. A few more pieces of business before we get started. Um, the agenda for today will be giving you a bit of an overview of the California Literacy Roadmap and the content blocks. And then Dr. Hebert will be talking about the benefits, what the research tells us about the benefits of integrating reading and writing instruction. Then we will be actually turning to the literacy content blocks, and Dr. Yop will be sharing with us how that is treated within the content blocks and instructional practices to support integrated reading and writing. Then we'll take a turn to looking at specific age and grade levels. Shanna Burkholz-Vasquez, who you'll meet presently, will be talking about the early years. She is Associate Director of the Early Education Division in the California Department of Education. And she will be talking about transitional kindergarten and young children. And then we'll move to the other end of the spectrum with Robbie and Deborah talking about ERWC ELD modules in middle school, and you'll learn more about what all that stands for when they speak. Toward the end, we'll bring all of them together and ask them a few questions and let them interact. You all can also ask questions. The Q&A feature is available for you. And we are also going to provide the link to the PowerPoint. So we'll put that in the chat so that you can access our slides as we go along. So what are the questions that we hope to answer today? Number one, what are the benefits of integrating reading and writing instruction? What do the literacy content blocks recommend in the area of integrated reading and writing? What does integrated reading and writing look like in play-based settings in the early years? And what does it look like in the ERWC ELD modules in the middle school years? And on the screen, you can see the link to the PDF of our slides. And again, that will be in the chat for you. So I want to set a bit of context for this before we get started with the benefits of integrated reading and writing. The California Literacy Roadmap was something that was in the governor's budget in 2023. And the intent of the roadmap was to support educators in implementing our standards in the framework that we've had for a number of years, the framework we've had since 2014. However, it still holds up today, we're proud to say. The decision was made to actually create literacy content blocks for both transitional kindergarten through grade 5 and grade 6 through 12 as a way to support educators, and you will be hearing more about that presently. We released the TK5 content blocks in May of last year, so they're not quite a whole year old. There is the link, and you will be seeing a bit more about that where you can find them online. And they're available as a PDF or as an online series of documents. The big news is that this spring we will be releasing the secondary literacy content blocks, grades 6 through 12. It'll be 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. And then a bit different, not content blocks, but guidance for multilingual literacy. So teaching literacy in multilingual settings, such as dual language programs, developmental bilingual programs, etc. So stay tuned for that. What is the purpose? As I said earlier, the purpose of the roadmap and the content blocks is to provide current and comprehensive yet concise guidance to help educators implement literacy instruction for all students. It's Also, to align with our standards for English language arts and literacy, for English language development, our preschool through transitional kindergarten learning foundations, or better known as the PTKLF, the ELA ELD framework, the English Learner Roadmap, and the dyslexia guidelines. The other purposes are to guide instruction based on local context and students' identified assets and assessed needs, and to reflect an intentional approach to literacy and biliteracy that promotes carefully sequenced initial instruction, appropriate practice and reinforcement, intervention as necessary, and meaningful application in English language arts and in all content areas. And Hallie will be talking more about all of that. A bit more about the content blocks, just to give you an idea. There are 4 literacy areas identified, along with some introductory material and basic principles. But those 4 areas are language, foundational literacy skills, integrated reading and writing, and comprehensive ELD. And so today, we are focusing on integrated reading and writing, which has 2 sub-areas: reading, engaging with text, and writing. But again, we constantly come back to this idea that they need to work together. And in fact, all 4 of these areas need to work together. What is it that we hope people will do with the content blocks? We suggest, and we've been out doing presentations, and we've had a number of other webinars. Recently, we had one on the foundational skills. But really consider using the literacy content blocks for team discussion and planning. Could be for individual reflection or even school-wide planning, but you see various things that you might want to consider: expectations for students, schedules, lesson plans, assessment results, planning for intervention, structuring professional learning, observations, coaching opportunities, to organize communities of practice, to take a look at instructional materials. And as you've probably heard, we have a follow-up adoption for English language arts and English language development coming up. And this summer, teams will be deliberating to determine which ones will be recommended for California. A list will be available in November, and there will also be a list of approved professional development come September. So we have a lot going on, but we can be looking at using the blocks to create a curriculum and assessment maps, and importantly, to communicate and collaborate with families as our equal partners. With that, I am going to turn over the control of this to Dr. Michael Hebert, and so pleased that you could join us, and look forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. I just sent you a quick message that I might have lost my control to advance slides, so I might need you to do that for me, if that's okay. So anyway, welcome everybody. I'm Michael A. Baer. I'm a professor at UC Irvine, as Nancy eloquently sort of introduced us all earlier. I also used to teach 3rd grade and 4th grade, and I was a reading specialist for a number of years. And one of the things I really got interested in that helped me sort of launch my the rest of my career into research was that when I would include writing in my reading instruction for kids, that I noticed that they would reading skills would improve faster, at a faster rate. They'd be able to read words better, understand text better, et cetera. And so I really got interested in that. I did a couple of meta-analyses, and I've been really touting this, I guess, the integration of reading and writing ever since. And so that's kind of where a little bit of my background. So I'm going to share some benefits and some theories around why writing and reading can be beneficial to teach together. Nancy, can you advance the slide for me? Great. So we've done. There's been several meta-analyses around, and mostly I focus on writing. So I'm going to really talk a little bit about writing. When I do, I want to really emphasize that it's usually writing about text or writing with the impact on reading as the outcome. So what meta-analyses have shown that writing is effective for learning in content areas, including in mathematics and science and social studies. There's studies on all of these things. Writing has been effective for improving reading outcomes, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that. I did a meta-analysis back in 2011 with Steve Graham, and we were able to show that. And then teaching reading and writing together, when you combine the two, have been shown to enhance both skills. So reading skills improve and writing skills improve. And so I'll share a little bit more data on this in upcoming slides. And Nancy, can you advance for me? Oh, I've got the advancement now. All right, so I just wanted to maybe sort of think about like why this is the case. And we all kind of know this, right? That reading and writing are interrelated communication activities, right? So they draw on language skills, and the goal is to, achieve, have a conversation with an absent audience. So somebody who maybe is absent, maybe distant from us in space or time. And so I have this figure here to show that, writing on one side of the world to reading on the other side of the world. And there are three theories about why integrating these skills is beneficial. So I'm going to go through these one by one with some examples. First is the functional relations theory. Really, that this theory sort of posits that reading and writing are both functional activities, and they can be combined in a ways that in a way to help us meet a goal, right? So I might, if I've got an example goal in the image here, where we're gathering information to answer a scientific question, and we can read information about the scientific question and to get some background knowledge, and then we can also write hypotheses. We can jot down notes about the information around that scientific question, and so we can combine sort of our reading and writing skills together to achieve that goal. An example of this might be something like taking notes about reading. I've got this example here where we're reading about plants and animals and the cells that make up plants and animals, similarities and differences about those cells. It uses a lot of scientific language. And then the task below is to jot notes down about the similarities and differences about plant and animal cells. By doing this, what we do is we focus students' attention on particular concepts in the reading, right? So students have to read the text, they have to think about, all right, what are similarities, what are differences, and then as they choose those explicitly, they write those similarities and differences down, and it's going to help them remember or solidify their understanding of those topics. There's, I've got a lot of evidence around, how writing about text improves comprehension. We did a meta-analysis in 2011 where we were looking at like average effect sizes. And so, all of these effect sizes from the 0.27 all the way to 0.77 are really impactful, means that kids are learning. These are, sort of expressed in standard deviation units. But one of the ways I like to sort of express my sort of my understanding of effect sizes through dancing, right? So if I have an effect size, if I'm a researcher and I get an effect size of something like 0.2, I might be dancing on the street because I'm like, this is really effective for kids. We really need to do these activities with them. If I get an effect size of 0.5, I might be dancing on top of the Empire State Building. So I am like, super excited. This is really impactful for kids, and we should, again, be doing this a lot. And then if I find an effect size around 0.8, I am dancing on the moon. Like we're out of this world because it's just so impactful. So you can see that, when we were looking at the literature, we looked at a range of studies, cross grade levels, and we found that when we have kids generate or respond to questions about writing or about the reading, they improve their reading comprehension. If they take notes about their reading, they improve their comprehension. If they're writing summaries, or if they're writing an analysis or an interpretation of a text, then that can really impact their reading comprehension. I do want to give a little caveat that none of these tasks were compared in these studies necessarily. And so it doesn't necessarily say that this doesn't mean that analysis interpretation is always better than generating or responding to questions. Really, all of these activities are impactful. And so one of my recommendations is always to use all of the strategies. All right. The second theory about why these should be integrated is that teaching one skill can impact related skills. So this is the shared knowledge theory that reading and writing are drawing from common knowledge bases from the same well. So if you can think about like spelling, for example, and word reading, as kids are spelling words, they have to think about the sounds and the graphemes that make those sounds, and then they have to separate those sounds into the phonemes, represent the phonemes with the graphemes, and then make sure that they've spelled the word correctly. For decoding, they are looking at the graphemes and producing sounds, and then they have to blend those sounds together to make a word. So you can see that the shared knowledge component there. I'm just going to share a quick example of so this could be at the word level, but also be at the grammar level or sentence level. So sentence combining is a really great way to combine reading and writing skills, and it both improves reading and writing. So if we had kernel sentences like the noodles were long, the noodles were skinny, the noodles fell on the floor, the noodles cracked into pieces, the dinner was ruined. Often I'll have my audience members, we don't have time for this, but I'll have people combine these into one grammatically correct sentence. Here are some examples of sentences that you might combine these into. So dinner was ruined when the long skinny noodles fell on the floor and cracked into pieces. Or because the long skinny noodles fell on the floor and cracked into pieces, dinner was ruined. So each of these, as kids practice these skills, they learn more about grammatical structures of sentences, how to read sentences with dependent and independent clauses, really understand complex sentence structures, and so on. And that can help them in both their reading and their writing skills. Evidence for the shared knowledge theory is that when we teach writing skills, like text structure instruction, it improves reading comprehension. So as we teach kids about, compare and contrast structures or cause effect structures, then they start to notice these in their reading, and it improves their comprehension of the text. Teaching spelling skills strengthens word reading, and writing instruction, around like things like sentence combining that I just showed you, can improve reading fluency. And you can see that we're getting really big effect sizes in some of those areas. So we're really excited about how those things can work together. Some other examples of how you might combine reading and writing instruction might be things like reading suffixes to help students chunk and recognize words and vocabulary and get to automaticity around reading those suffixes. And then we might explicitly teach students to read and sort words with able suffixes like IBLE and ABLE. And as we do that, I might teach them to sort of look at these categories of words, and then I might note that take a look at the ABLE words. Each of those has a base word that can stand alone, right? So depend, dependable, expand, expandable. Whereas the IBLE words, odd, cred, those words don't stand alone on their own, right? And so those are situations we might use the IBLE suffix. And then I might ask them to spell words like playable, and they have to think about, is that a word that can stand alone? And then which suffix might I use? So these are examples of how we can leverage those things. The third strategy that I want to share is the rhetorical relations theory, right? So this one is just as students read and write, they learn about rhetorical structures and devices that authors might use, and they understand how maybe it has an impact on them, and then they can start to emulate those, and they can craft their writing with specific goals for their readers. So this requires a little bit of an understanding of your audience and things like that. But as you're, the figures on the right show, reading influences writing. So as we're reading, we might get all the feels. There may be something in the reading that we're like, wow, this is really persuading me, or this is really making me feel like happy, or this is really funny. And then that might translate into how I might, write about, or translate into my writing. Similarly, as we're writing, and we learn how to impact our audience by organizing ideas, structuring things a certain way, creating a great opening that might be, grabbing the attention of the reader, then we might start to notice that other authors are doing that to us when we're reading. And so that might help us with our reading comprehension later. I just want to provide a quick example of this, right? So this is, I love sharing poetry with kids. So this is The Red Wheelbarrow by Carlos Williams. And as I read the poem, what I'd like for you to do is I want you to think about, like, what's a golden line for you? What word or phrase stands out because, or maybe, I like how the author uses blank to show. So The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. And so things that you might notice are how the words are sort of shaped like wheelbarrows, right? I love the way that the author says so much, right? So much depends upon, but doesn't really explain what that so much is. It leaves a lot for the reader to sort of think about, right? And so as I'm talking about this, maybe I'm getting some ideas that maybe I want to leave some things open to interpretation for my readers so that they can kind of fill in the blanks sometimes, right? All right, so there's evidence for the rhetorical relation strategy, so that just increasing the amount of that students write can improve reading comprehension. So there's some studies that looked at readers workshop and writers workshop, and when we just asked kids to write more often, it improves their reading. And so we of course I agree with I really think that we need to integrate the two, but I really want to emphasize that sort of having kids write. When they're writing, they are also reading. They're reading their own writing. They may be reading the writing of other students, etc. So we can really capitalize on that. So some considerations that I want you to think about as we go into the rest of this webinar is that the relationships between reading and writing evolve as the skills develop over time, right? And so I really like how this, the integrated reading and writing content block really has different activities at different grade levels, and we'll hear more about those. There are various types of shared knowledge, so I want you to think about when you're talking with or teaching your students, shared knowledge about words, syntax, text structures, processes we use, right? So all of those things are important to pay attention to. We also need to teach children how to integrate skills and provide time for practice. So when we were doing our meta-analysis, we noticed that when kids took notes, we had an effect size of 0.4, and that's great. So we want them to practice that. But when we provide instruction in how to take notes, then the effects can be even stronger. A few other considerations: students with disabilities. I have a survey that I did recently where some teachers, special education teachers and classroom teachers thought, well, my students might not have the writing skills or the skills to be able to benefit from writing about reading. And I just want to debunk that a little bit because there's a meta-analysis by Shanahan et al. In 2025. And we found in our own meta-analyses that when students with disabilities or difficulties might actually benefit more from integrating reading and writing. We also need to. I'll just say one more thing about that. That is that when kids are having reading or writing difficulties, like if they don't have reading and writing difficulties and they read text, they may not need to write about the text because maybe they just understand the text. And so that's the point here. Is that so we really need to integrate the skills for these lower performing kids. We also need to include a range of longer and shorter writing activities. Teachers seem to primarily use shorter writing assignments based on my survey research. And so, I would really encourage teachers to use longer writing activities as well. And that is also in a recommendation in this content block. So, and lastly, we need to train teachers on how to teach writing and integrate reading and writing. So I'm very glad y'all are here because I feel like you're getting a little bit of that training now. And with that, I'll just give one final consideration around how we really need to think about, using different types of writing activities. So the writing activity can facilitate thinking about text in different ways. And I just want you to consider these two activities: taking notes about plant and animal cells, like we, sort of shared earlier, or generating questions. So when we're taking notes, we might be thinking about what are the details, what are the similarities and differences, and it's very directly in the text kind of things that we're looking at. And then generating questions, on the other hand, when we say, read this passage on the Statue of Freedom, it sits upon top of the United States Capitol. As students generate questions about this text, they get to interact with it in sort of a personal way, asking questions about the things that they are most interested in, and then maybe following up on those questions. So just sort of showing that we really need to use different types of writing activities. And I hope that I did that fast enough. Whoops, going too far. I have some references in here, and Nancy, I'll let you take back over.
Thank you, Michael. That was fabulous. It's just so gratifying to understand the research that supports writing to think and to read and reading to write. So thank you very much. And we'll be talking to you more during the panel discussion. I'd like to turn to Hallie Yap. Dr. Yap will talk more about the literacy content blocks. So to you.
Thank you. I just realized I was on mute, so I got it now. Thank you very much. And hi, it's so nice of all of you to be here. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak about the content literacy, the literacy content blocks, specifically about integrated reading and writing. You will see that we drew from the research as we developed the document. Thanks, Michael, for setting the stage so beautifully. And thanks, too, for all your impactful work over the years. I'm a fan. Shortly ago, Nancy shared the organization of the blocks, and this slide is a reminder that the instructional guidance for each grade level or span is provided in these 4 areas: language, foundational literacy skills, integrated reading and writing, and comprehensive ELD. My job today is to provide a view of the instructional practices shared in the literacy content blocks in the area of reading and writing. Before we launch into that, however, it's important to know that the practices you find in the document should be read in the context of the important understandings outlined in the overall introduction to the blocks, as well as the basic principles shared for each grade level or span. This slide shows where you can find the introduction. The link precedes the link to all the grade levels. On this next slide, I paraphrase a few of the important understandings. Among these is that students differ in terms of strengths and areas of need, in terms of their interests, their experiences, their backgrounds, in terms of their English language proficiency, as well as proficiency in a home language, in terms of their social and emotional development, their physical development, their cognitive development. Educators should plan with that variation in mind as they consider materials, settings, scheduling, and so forth. So please view the specific practices in this document with this important understanding in mind. Students differ. We also point out that relationships matter, relationships with adults and with peers. The human environment impacts student learning. Instruction occurs ideally in a supportive, well thought out environment with a knowledgeable and caring teacher, and one that supports students engaging with their peers. Because of students' differences, there's much to learn from one another. Interacting with peers can influence a student's motivation, their attention, their effort, as well as by articulating their ideas and listening to the ideas and perspectives of one another, it can enrich their understanding of a text or a topic that they are studying. Another important understanding is that adults in effective systems share responsibility for student learning. We collaborate and engage in data-driven decision-making. We work with our colleagues to implement a multi-tiered system of support framework to ensure all student success. I hope you will explore the practices with your peers. I'll share one more understanding, and that is the context in which we hope you read these instructional practices. That is that the guidance was informed by existing state documents, many that Nancy mentioned earlier. One important example of this is the graphic from the framework, especially the 5 cross-cutting themes of instruction. These are the 5 smaller circles here. When we think about integrated reading and writing, you will see that meaning making lives in the guidance, as do language development, building content knowledge, using foundational skills and developing those skills, and effective expression. How is an idea communicated effectively? In the next slide, in addition, we see that in addition to viewing the practices through the lens of important understandings, and I just shared a few of those, please explore the basic principles that are provided for every grade level or grade span. This slide shows one of the tabs in the literacy roadmap site, and it includes principles. I'm looking at the kindergarten side, which I know is too small for you to read, but this just so that you can have a sense of what those look like. Intentionally and sequentially plan and provide learning experiences that include explicit instruction and guided and play-based activities that address specific objectives. Attend to motivation, provide choice, share texts and study topics that are relevant to students' lives and reflect their interests and their identities. Ensure challenge and encourage students, ensure that students see themselves as successful learners. Monitor progress and give timely and specific feedback. Integrate ELD for ELD students into all instruction, and of course, provide designated instruction as well. And incorporate multimodal strategies and actively engage students in learning. Those are some of the basic principles that are articulated at the beginning of each grade or grade span. There's more. Please read this section. This slide presents a view of the heart of the literacy content blocks. So you're going to be reading this heart of the blocks in the context of the important understandings and the basic principles. Here are the practices. In integrated reading and writing, the bulleted items are preceded with descriptions of what we mean by integrated reading and writing, as well as a description of the 2 sub-areas, reading, engaging with text, and writing. Each of those sub-areas is followed by evidence-based practices. This slide happens to display part of grade 1. All grades are in this format you will find in the online documents. The next 2 slides, we share some of the important or core practices. The slides here provide highlights and can serve as a high-level summary of the evidence-based practices in the 2 sub-areas of integrated reading and writing. These are not by grade level here because I could not possibly share all of the TK through grade 8 practices. So this is more of a high level. These practices occur in different forms in many of the grade levels. Please note, as they're not a substitute for the blocks themselves, and they do not present all practices in all grade levels. However, they capture core ideas across the grades. So let me share these now. In the reading, engaging with text sub-area, the guidance includes integrating reading, writing, and discussion. And that's in all content areas. And that includes both brief and extended opportunities to engage in all three of those, to engage in extensive reading and brief moments of reading, to engage in extensive writing and brief moments of writing, to engage in extended discussions and brief quick turn and talk discussions. The guidance also calls for promoting reading volume. We know this contributes to language development and appreciation for variation in use, to world knowledge, to cultural understanding, to empathy, and ensure that we prompt responses to texts we are reading. Reading aloud, literary and informational texts with a range of text types and genres, and also specifically teaching students about organization and text features. Using texts that reflect children's interests and identities. Engaging children with increasingly complex text, ensuring that all students have access with support, ideally temporary support, as needed to grade level material. All students in third grade have a right to access third grade level material, and so on. Promoting comprehension in discussions and writing, followed by discussions, individually and in collaboration with peers. This includes items such as thinking aloud about a text, engaging in text deconstruction, that is, breaking down a sentence or a paragraph into smaller bits and then reassembling them to make sense of the full sentence or paragraph. Asking text-dependent questions, responding to those, engaging in comprehension strategies such as drawing upon prior knowledge, scanning a text to make predictions, annotating a text, monitoring comprehension, and employing fix-up strategies such as rereading or creating an outline or retelling or reenacting a story or ideas from a text, and teaching and engaging students in routines for thinking and talking about texts. Two more that I'll just highlight here are differentiating language supports for EL students based upon their proficiency level. And I urge you to see the comprehensive ELD area of the content of the literacy content block. And engaging in project-based or thematic units to spark and build off of students' interests and capitalize on their interests to promote collaboration and inquiry and to integrate reading and writing into the content areas. That was a lot on one slide, and here I share some of the core ideas and the writing sub-area of integrating reading and writing. Notice the first thing we say here, as well as in the documents themselves: integrate reading, writing, and discussion. That guidance promotes integrating reading, writing, and discussion. Promotes daily opportunities for formal and informal writing across the content areas. Longer and shorter writing activities in response to texts and learning experiences, using different strategies such as summarizing or individually or with a peer, generating questions, creating an outline, providing prompts, targeting specific goals, like writing from a different perspective, and writing in the context of explicit instruction, such as writing complex sentences or Michael, sentence combining, or using a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, depending upon the grade level. Developing fluency in printing, spelling, and sentence construction. Using exemplar and mentor texts to see and emulate powerful word choice. By the way, I liked glazed in your poem, Michael. Impact of different sentence structures, noting and then employing rhetorical practices, such as identifying how to convince a reader of your point of view or make the readers laugh. And I think you'll hear about this when our colleagues from ERWC share their slides, and as well as how conventions are used. Providing scaffolds and learning supports as needed, such as sentence frames and graphic organizers to follow the organization or logic of a text. To develop and organize text appropriate to a task and to the purpose and to the audience, providing opportunities to give and receive feedback and opportunities to revise based on that feedback, sharing writing with an audience, highlighting cross-linguistic connections, the use of cognates, the use of punctuation or syntax, such as where to position an adjective relative to a noun in English versus, say, Spanish. And again, explicitly, we include the notion as we talk about the sub-area of writing, engaging students in project-based or thematic units, sparking and capitalizing on their interests, promoting collaboration and inquiry, and integrating reading and writing in the content areas. I'd like to wrap up this on the California roadmap, and wrap up my section of this webinar by saying I encouraged you to read the evidence-based practices in the context of important understandings and basic principles, but I also urge you to read them in the context of the other literacy areas. You will see reading and writing living in the language practices, the foundational literacy skills practices, and the comprehensive ELD practices, and that's as it should be. Thank you.
And I have accomplished my major task to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Hallie. That's such a clear explanation of the literacy content blocks. And it is my privilege now to introduce Shanna Burkholz Vasquez. She is the Associate Director of our Early Education Division and has years of teaching and working in the realm of the very young child. And so she's going to do a presentation for us, thinking about what's appropriate in those beginning years. Go ahead, Shanna.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm so happy to be here with everyone today. I am going to be speaking about playful, joyful, early literacy and writing instruction. But before we dive in to the language and literacy domain of the preschool TK Learning Foundations, I wanted to share just a little bit about the preschool TK Learning Foundations as a whole. So they were released in the summer of 2024. They span across 9 different domains with a focus on the whole child and describe the knowledge and skills that most children between the ages of 3 to 5.5 develop in a high quality early education program. So that may include TK or the California State Preschool Program or other state funded, federally funded, and private preschools across the state. The PTKLFs, as we call them, can be used by early childhood leaders and educators to set learning goals for children, acknowledging that to do this, you first need to meet the child on their developmental continuum and then scaffold to meet those goals. They support in planning learning environments and teaching strategies to support scaffolding. They help in selecting and implementing a curricula, designing and the use of assessments. They enhance the P3 alignment and they inform programs of continuous quality improvement. So on the next few slides, I'm going to give you an overview of the language and literacy domain of the PTKLF. This domain should serve as a guide for designing intentional literacy instruction and activities in early childhood classrooms. So it's important to note that the language and literacy domain is divided into 2 subdomains. We have the foundational language development and we have English language development. Foundational language development focuses on the foundational language development of a child's home language, whether that be English or another language. English language development, however, is just for children who are learning English and whose home language is a language other than English. For the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus solely on the foundational language development. Oh, there we go. So the organization of foundational language development includes 4 strands. We have the first strand of listening and speaking, which includes vocabulary, grammar, and language use. We have strand 2, foundational literacy skills, which includes phonological awareness, alphabetics, and print and concepts about print. Strand 3 focuses on reading, which includes literacy, interest and response, and comprehension and analysis of age-appropriate texts. And then strand 4 is writing, which includes writing skills and writing as communication. So this slide highlights two PTKLF examples that shows how reading and writing can be integrated into early learning settings. So in the first example, which comes from Foundations 3.2, Understanding Stories, a child listens to a new story in their home language and then retells it to peers or even a stuffed animal. This helps children practice sequencing events, describing characters, and using new vocabulary while strengthening comprehension and oral expression. Using the home language supports and confidence builds a bridge towards later English literacy. In the second example, Foundations 3.3, Understanding Informational Text, this involves reading about the seasons. The teacher prompts the child to draw something that they enjoy in the fall and then writes a dictated sentence about the drawing. So this shows a great connection between reading and writing in meaningful ways. And it shows how students in the early years can write through pictures or acting out or even dictating to a teacher. And the teacher can then model how spoken words connect to print. And so again, we just wanted to show how these examples share how integrated literacy is active, meaningful, and culturally responsive, helping children develop language and comprehension through authentic experiences. On this slide, you'll see a graphic of two puzzle pieces coming together. One piece is explicit instruction, and the other is playful learning. Explicit instruction and playful learning can and should work together to create powerful and joyful literacy experiences for young learners. These two approaches should not be seen as contradictory, but as equal partners in providing children with high-quality learning experiences that reflect the four strands in the language and literacy domain of the PTKLF. Intentionally and sequentially planned explicit instruction can lead to guided and play-based activities that address specific literacy objectives that are developmentally appropriate and reflective of the children in the classroom. It's important to provide instruction in whole group, small group, and one-on-one settings and ensure opportunity for individual and paired practice, exploration, and meaningful interaction with the content. Educators should recognize, value, and build from children's strengths, interests, cultures, languages, backgrounds, and ways of expressing knowledge and skills. That might be gesturing or drawing or role-playing. Children should be motivated by providing appropriately challenging and culturally and linguistically authentic and relevant materials and activities. Teachers should provide choice and plentiful access to print materials and books representing diverse genres, authors, topics, and languages, and ensure that children see themselves as successful learners. There we go. This graphic depicts our playful learning tree, which explores what instructional time can and should look like in an early learning classroom that embraces play-based learning strategies. Although this tree focuses on preschool, we know that similar strategies support learning across the P3 continuum. As our graphic highlights, learning thrives in an environment that celebrates and affirms cultural and linguistic diversity, actively combats racism, and pursues equity, embraces inclusion, and promotes belonging for each and every child. The CDE is committed to providing educators with the tools and resources to incorporate more play in all areas of the classroom, including learning centers, small group, math and literacy instruction, music and movement. And it's important to note that the playful learning tree, like all learning in early childhood, is rooted in strengthening home language skills and building social emotional skills for children. I just want to mention that young learners thrive when at least 50% of instructional time relies on children-directed playful learning activities. And during those activities, educators can integrate reading and writing activities through, conversations and interactions with children as they're playing. There's also time for educator-guided and educator-directed learning activities, both in whole group and small group contexts. So on the next few slides, we want to keep the partnership between explicit instruction and playful learning in mind as we discuss what playful literacy may look like in practice. So having a language-rich curriculum is also important, one that introduces vocabulary and making connections across content areas through discussion topics or books, as well as ample opportunity for children to engage in purposeful talk and communication in both their home language and English. Language-rich environments allow opportunities to strengthen language through everyday routines and interactions. As teachers, the use of open-ended questions are a powerful tool in fostering language development and encouraging children to engage in language. Literacy development is also supported by print-rich environments with many different types of written materials, such as books, posters, toys, signs, and labels in English or the home language. It's important to read to children every day from both fiction and nonfiction texts to support interest in literacy by offering materials for children to explore on their own and engage in songs and rhymes and wordplay. Books that represent children's own cultural, ethnic, and language backgrounds are especially valuable as they engage children's interest in reading and support their comprehension. Weaving literacy instruction and activities throughout the school day may seem challenging, but childhood education programs are usually already set up for success by embedding literacy naturally into designated learning areas. So in the images on this slide, you'll see some examples of how to connect literacy with other content areas by providing children with opportunities to practice reading, writing, listening, and speaking in art, science, dramatic play, music, and reading centers around the classroom. So in the art center, it's a wonderful example of how to create joyful literacy experiences. Students paint, cut, and glue to create sculptures using Play-Doh or clay. They can share what they've created with their teachers and peers. This offers a chance for them to ask and answer questions and begin to recognize writing skills as the teacher writes down what they say and reads it back to them. In the Science Center, bringing literacy into science is equally as seamless. As students are making observations, teachers can offer them clipboards and paper to start drawing or even writing down what they see. This is also a great way to practice content-specific vocabulary, such as when learning about the life cycle of a butterfly. In the Reading Center, there are reading corners in classrooms, in the classroom libraries that give children opportunities to explore fiction and nonfiction texts, to learn concepts of print, and to discover the types of books they enjoy. And also it allows them their natural curiosity to spark a love of reading. In dramatic play areas, that allows naturally for listening and speaking, reading and writing opportunities as they play restaurant, and they can create menus and have notepads for children to select and write down their orders. Dramatic play spaces that change themes can be another way to keep the area feeling fresh and fun for young learners. So you can create a doctor or a dentist or a veterinary office where children can speak to their patients, ask questions, and write notes. Set up a flower shop where students can make cards and pretend flower arrangements for their friends and family. Then we have the Music Center, where playing with musical instruments bring in opportunities to practice vocabulary, such as fast and slow, loud, soft. Consider teaching students monthly poems or nursery rhymes and having the words printed on large posters or pocket charts. Students can sing, track the print, and search for letters and sounds in ways that are engaging and fun. So as you can see, bringing literacy into the day is just a matter of looking at your daily activities in a slightly different way and bringing in more intention and focus to the skills that make up the foundational literacy development. I'll pass it back to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Shanna. I think we all want to be in those classrooms right now. Those look like fun. And now I would like to introduce two more of our friends, Roberta Ching and Deborah Boggs, who will be talking about integrating reading and writing in ERWC, and I will let them explain what ERWC is. So thank you very much. And we have a note from our interpreters to not speak too quickly so they can interpret.
Sure. Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about ERWC, and just as an overview, it's a 20+ year initiative of the CSU. You can see under the principles column there that we have always integrated reading, writing, oral communication, and language development using a student-centered, inquiry-based approach focused around compelling issues and culturally relevant texts. ERWC used to stand for expository reading and writing, but since then we have kind of gone with just the acronym because we have expanded beyond just expository text. We are aligned and in fact developed alongside the ELA-ELD framework and California's approach to ELD with a designated curriculum that builds into and from an ELA curriculum. So designed to be implemented by an ELA teacher and an ELD teacher collaborating around a common text. Specifically designed for long-term English learners. And excitingly, we just have preliminary data from a 5-year NPD grant that shows a statistically significant growth for LTELs on both LPAC and CASP. Oops. This little graphic kind of shows how we view integrated and designated ELD with the zipper of ERWC, bringing together both the content and the standards documents, with Common Core standards being primary in the ELA side and ELD standards being primary on the designated side, but both classrooms are building around the same content. We use an assignment template that really apprentices students to the habits of mind of effective readers and writers. So we learn to read rhetorically by preparing to read, reading purposely, questioning the text. Then we gather our thinking and prepare to respond. We use things like mentor texts to help us guide our thinking about how to create a task, create a text in response to the reading that we do. So we always talk about moving through these moves from the professional text to the student text. And as a matter of fact, we also talk about how writing starts on day one as we prepare to read and think about how we read as writers and learn about writing by observing the writer's craft and the moves that professional writers make. These are some of the modules that we have created available for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. There are additional modules that work through 9 through 12. And we created these topics and texts designed specifically to be contemporary, newer texts, and illustrative of the kinds of students of California. We focus around questions at issue that guide reading to think about what do writers have to say about a particular topic, and then what might our response be. Some examples would be, how do language communities shape our language use? What is the value of praise? What is the role of a citizen in addressing the wrongs of their government? So students are considering these topics, these questions, the issues that writers have been grappling with, not just today, but oftentimes over the long term, and they are considering how they might join that conversation with their own texts. And we focus on helping module writers consider the affordances of text. What opportunities for teaching at the whole text level, at the section or paragraph level, at the sentence or clause level, at the phrase or word level. So we learn about how to construct sentences by examining effective sentences of professional writers. We try to emulate their sentences and think about the kinds of choices that they made with vocabulary and language and how that might be persuasive. And again, this comes straight out of the ELD standards. The standards reference teaching students how to use language appropriately for audience and purpose, and ERWC does this through text-based activities, so everything is taught contextually based on how writers and speakers use language. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Robbie.
So I'm going to be showing you in a particular module, from a particular module, some examples of how this happens. But first, we believe that oral language is key for students reading and writing. So all of our activities are based on structuring discussions that students can have around the readings that they're doing and the writing they're doing in response to those readings. No, sorry. And we're having students address the ELD standards, so that part 2 of the standards, how English works, as they engage with that, they are able to be successful in implementing part 1 of the standards as they collaborate around texts, interpret those texts, and then produce texts of their own. As an example, in 7th grade, we have a module based on When You Trap a Tiger by Ty Keller, a young adult novel. This is a novel about 2 girls who move with their mother from Southern California to a fictional town in the state of Washington named Sunshine, where it always rains. And it turns out that they're moving there because the girl's grandmother, Haimoni, which is grandmother in Korean, is dying, and their mom needs to be there with her mother. And Lily, the protagonist, is very disturbed by this. Over the course of the narrative of the novel, the grandmother tells Lily 3 traditional Korean folk tales to help her come to terms with the condition of the grandmother. The last of these folk tales, Lily tells to her grandmother when she's in the hospital, and the message that she wants to convey with her folk tale is that she has understood the message that the grandmother has been communicating. So we always advise teachers to begin planning with the end in mind. In other words, looking at the culminating task, thinking about what students will need to do to be successful on that task, and analyzing the affordances of the text that they're reading, so that as they read, they analyze the craft of the writer in order to be successful in crafting their own text. So for the Tiger module, students are writing a folktale. Keller, the author of the Tiger module, of the Tiger novel, writes in her author's note, "So with nowhere else to turn, I wrote my own story." So students have a chance to write their own story, but in the form of a folktale. So they create a folktale that tells a story about a problem that they need to solve or have already solved, and a moral to communicate what they want their readers to learn. So one of the affordances of this text and of literature in general is students can learn about quotations and dialogue tags. So an example of this, Haimoni throws the front door open with a bang and squeals, "Hello, my girls home to see me." And here the dialogue tag, Haimoni squeals, introduces the dialogue, so we know who's speaking, but we don't just know who's speaking, we also know how she's speaking, because she squeals, she's excited. So then students look at a number of other examples of dialogue and identify who's speaking, and in the process, notice the different ways that a skilled writer can introduce dialogue. So some of the things that they might notice Quotations are sometimes long and sometimes short. The dialogue tag tells you who said it, so just the basics. But quotations often don't have a dialogue tag. You can infer who's speaking from the context. Say is the most commonly used tag by most writers, including most students, but there's other kinds of language like harmony squeals that can also be used. Sometimes the tag comes before the quotation, sometimes in the middle, sometimes at the end, and quotation marks mark the words of the speaker. So then students figure out the rules for punctuating dialogue. We don't tell them the rules. We don't give them a list of rules. We let them observe how a skilled writer has punctuated her quotations. And all of this is in preparation for students to then go on and write their own, sorry, their own folktale and incorporate dialogue in the folktale. Amongst the strengths of this approach is that students can then transfer what they're learning to other kinds of writing and other situations. So, for example, with drawing their attention to how writers incorporate dialogue, transfers to writing research-based texts where they are bringing in sources as evidence for their claims in an argumentative or persuasive piece of writing. And there, of course, the function of the tag is to identify who the source is, and often the writer can indicate the stance towards that source. And the use of quotations, of course, appears in both places. So we try to urge teachers to help students not just prepare to be successful on the assignment for the particular module, but to think about what they're learning that they can apply to other forms of reading and writing.
Okay, and if you want to know more, our website is writing.csusuccess.org. We have several open source documents that you can see everything on that top line you can access without a login. But to access the curriculum, we do give our curriculum away for free. We just ask that teachers come to a workshop. And so any teacher that attends a free 4-day workshop gets certified, and you can find information about that on our website as well. So thank you. Back to you, Nancy.
Now I want to also be in that 7th grade classroom and read that novel. Thank you very much. We are now going to spend some time with our presenters. So I'd like to invite Shannon, Hallie, and Michael to rejoin us so that we can ask you some questions and hear your thinking. And one of the first things we'd like to hear, and shortly I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can focus on all their faces. But, what are some of your reactions to what you've heard today? What would you like to add? And I will ask for volunteers about the importance of integrating reading and writing and the way we do that. And then at the second question that we'll see if we have time to get to, but what would you suggest to teachers whose students may be having difficulty reading and writing independently? With that, I am going to stop sharing and invite the panelists to gather together. You can change your view in this Zoom to gallery and then see everyone. So let me ask this first question, which is, what reactions do you have to what you've heard today.
I can start. I thought it was so interesting. Robbie and I have conducted a workshop just today and yesterday with some teachers. We talked about sentence combining. We talked about all the things that you guys mentioned. And so it was really gratifying to hear that this is across grade levels.
Yeah, I think I loved seeing all of the different strategies and ideas. I feel like one of the things that's really important is to, I think for teachers, I think there's, sometimes a question about like, what do we let go of, right? If we have to do another thing. And I think that Hallie might have, or maybe it was Shanna that sort of said, these are things that we're doing every day anyway. So it's sort of reframing, and it just goes to show if you're doing all of these different types of activities, you can really incorporate them throughout the day, throughout the week, and throughout the content areas. And I think that's super important. And so I just loved seeing all of those ideas.
It's exciting for us to see that this is going down into pre-K because with ERWC, we now have grades 6 through 12 where these kinds of approaches to reading and writing are embedded in a curriculum. But bringing it into the earlier grades will just mean that students are that much further along when they get to our courses.
I think that is what I was going to share is I really appreciated that on this webinar, we were able to show just really the span of learning and development across so many different, ages and times of a student's life. I think that that really helps educators and administrators to see that full continuum and what it can look like as students kind of move through our system. And so I thought it was fabulous to hear and see how all of those strategies build off of each other and connect. I thought was really powerful.
Now, I don't have much to add to that other than to say, yes, I agree. Very exciting. There's so many good things going on. And how do we get that out to all classrooms? How do we support all teachers? How do we make them realize it isn't just add, but that in fact, we can do so much of this in very positive, supportive ways that are not just an addition to the curriculum. The only other thing I want to add is so much of this that I heard and that I feel and that I hope captured in my little section, but if not there, then in the document is this whole notion of being responsive to student moods too, but moves, responsive to student moods, but also having a plan, having a direction, having goals, being, systematically pursuing how, it's one thing to say, hey, let's write every day, and another thing to help students learn how to write better and in ways that give them the power to communicate their ideas and their thoughts and their understandings and so forth. So
one of the things we talked about a lot this week with teachers was that idea of the text has everything for you. You don't need to add a grammar book or mini lessons from a separate area because you learn about writing from writers, and using mentor texts just expands their options for how to approach a text. And so the teacher doesn't need to provide a template. The teacher doesn't need to provide necessarily a graphic organizer because the student can look at how the writer created a folktale and use that as their model. And they create the success criteria. What made that an effective one? What kind of language? What kind of structure? What kind of characters? And so that builds for them the ability to become writers like real writers.
We have some questions here that I'm going to pitch one to Robbie and Deborah. If you're already using the ERWC curriculum for our ELD designated classes, can we access the modules for both middle school and high school from the website, or do we still need to attend the workshop?
once you have access, right? And you've been trained in the approaches, so you are ready to go. All the modules are there with ELD and ELA for 6 through 8 on the website.
Great. And we have someone who asks where to find information on the early years work. And the literacy content blocks are right on the CDE website. You can go right to California Literacy and find them. But Shanna, where would you suggest people go for some of the work you've been doing, like the PTKLF, et cetera?
Sure, absolutely. The preschool TK learning foundations are also on the CDE website. I will also note that the P3 learning progressions they're great tools for looking at that continuum that we were talking about earlier. I think those are great resources. And then there are a number of resources that we have placed on California Educators Together. I can definitely share a link with everybody so that you are aware of that. But we have a UPK P3 group on California Educators Together that have a number of resources. So they have a curriculum checklist. It's a checklist that can be used to make sure that your early learning space is in alignment with what an early learning space should look like. We also have sample days of how you could organize a TK day, either a half day or a full day, which that's really great to see how you can integrate reading, writing, literacy, all those literacy components throughout the day in the different centers and small group and whole group instruction that you may have throughout the day. And so I can go ahead and give you a link to that. I will look for it right now and put it in the chat.
Great. These questions just help us guide this conversation, and this could either be for Hallie or for Michael. What are some effective strategies for K-5 teachers to effectively integrate language support for multilingual English learner students as well as native speakers of English who are increasingly showing gaps in language development?
May I just start, and I'll be short, Michael, because I'm sure you've got some great ideas. First, I want to go back to what we were just talking about with the TK and say the framework is also another good resource. Read chapter 3, because we talk about what's going on in TK, and so many of these ideas are integrated throughout that chapter. Playful learning, helping children explore, integrating writing and reading as kids attempt to communicate and engage with books and stories and so forth. So that's one piece to it, but then that relates, and this is why I popped in, because that relates also to this question, and that is I would recommend that you read through the vignettes in the framework, because those vignettes provide examples of how to engage in integrated ELD as well as designated ELD. And then part of that question was also related to children's gaps. I would say we need to make sure we're paying attention to those gaps, and we need to recognize that we are not serving children if we decide that, oh, they cannot read well enough, so I will just lecture, or I will just read aloud to them. Please read aloud to kids all the time, no matter how old they are. But you also need to give kids, the students, the opportunity to be reading. So whatever it takes to get them reading, by avoiding reading, by avoiding writing, oh, it takes them too long, or oh, it's this. Oh, by avoiding doing that, we are only perpetuating and widening those gaps. So, Michael.
Sure. I think you said it very well. I think I would maybe add, have kids talk in classrooms, right? I mean, really, if you're talking about building language, doing units or deep dives into a particular topic where you can, have kids talk about the topic using, vocabulary of either the discipline or around the topic or content area can really help them kind of plan a little bit about what they're going to write, and can be a good primer for what they're going to read, right? And so if you have kids, sharing and talking, and they're going to start to use, as they use words multiple times or get more and more exposure to those words, then you can start to expect it more in their writing, and then they'll be able to understand more of that language when they're reading. And so you always want to have kids talk about the text and talk about their writing, frankly, right? Use language about writing, like about the writing process, and about their thinking and why they might make certain choices, and when they're selecting words or writing a sentence in a particular way. I think all of those things can help.
I sent a question to Shanna, and you can give me the signal when you think you might want to answer that one, or I can read it out loud. But just in general, other comments about, and one of the questions mentioned all the devices that students are using, and what do you suggest for students who are really having difficulty being independent in their reading and writing?
I think this is really tricky. I think sometimes when we do things like we'll use like sentence frames or sentence starters or things like that, then what I notice teachers will tend to do is they begin to over rely on those things, and then kids begin to over rely on them, and then they don't know how to write without those things. And so I think we need to, it's great to have different tools. But then also allow students to write without those tools sometimes, right? And give them experiences both with and without. I think there was a question in the chat I answered earlier about speech to text. And I think that can be a really huge help for some kids who are having difficulty with mechanics, maybe kids with, physical impairments that may not be able to write. And so I think it's really important to allow kids to use those kinds of tools. But if they can also write with keyboard or other things, giving them opportunities to write with different modes so that they don't over rely on a particular tool would be great, if possible, right? I think when in some cases with kids with disabilities, they or physical impairments or whatever, they may not be able to use paper, pencil, or something like that when they're writing. So I think it's being thoughtful about what are the different experiences that we're providing kids, and then not over relying on like one tool, right? So I like don't fall into, well, I know how to use sentence frames, so I'm just going to use that every time, right? Try to use different tools and expose kids to all of those different tools.
I think it also
Thank you.
goes back to having texts that are engaging, that raise questions that students can feel are urgent to respond to. And if they've done, in our ERWC parlance, if they've done the reading rhetorically moves through that text, they've understood it, they've talked with each other about it, they're much more likely to then have an opinion that they want to persuade the rest of us to agree with. And we've had teachers report to us that they've written more and written more independently, once they start engaging with these modules that we've created for 6 through 12. And I think the approach undoubtedly would work in the earlier grades as well.
But just also about the independence in reading, it's a really critical issue, and we have a lot of students who are disengaged. And I think it's about how do we scaffold the reading so that we are doing things like juicy sentences, where we're showing them how to deconstruct long information, dense sentences. Think alouds, comprehension and action. How do you make meaning of text that's hard? And then building in structures so that we allow students to do some partner reading, some collaborative reading groups on our way to moving them toward independence. It's not a popcorn reading, teacher reading, or sit by yourself and read. There are so many strategies in between that help students build their confidence and their skills on the way to becoming independent.
And helping students to articulate the strategies that they're using so everybody else can start trying to apply some of those strategies.
And with that, we're almost out of time. Shanna, there was a question about time in TK.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I want to highlight is that when we talk about the duration of time that we want spent on literacy instruction, we are not saying it needs to be all at one time, and it all needs to be direct instruction. What we're saying is we need to have um, intentional literacy, and that's writing, reading times throughout the day. So being very intentional in those experiences that you're providing to your students. That doesn't mean that they just happen by chance, right? You come in with a plan and you are very strategic in what you're wanting to teach. You're looking at those PTKLFs, you're taking those P3 learning progressions, you're really being intentional about where your students are and what skills you're wanting to work on them with as they move forward in their learning. So please don't take that recommendation of time in terms of thinking that you need to be sitting students down in a whole group and talking to them. This is really meant to be used throughout the day in how you integrate, just like we talked about those learning centers, and being very intentional in how you utilize your time in those spaces. And if you have and want more in-depth response, you can always reach out to UPK at cde.ca.gov, and we can give you a much more robust response to that, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Shanna. And I'd like to invite my co-director Bonnie to come back on screen as we finish up our last few seconds together. I have shared our page of our next few webinars, and you can contact us through the statewide literacy campaign at cde.ca.gov. We're happy to try to answer your questions as well, and we so appreciate you being here today. And so it's a big thank you to all of you who have participated, and thank you to our presenters. I think they did a great job, and I'd like to give them a nice round of applause. Bonnie, any final words?
No final words. Thank you so much for the wisdom that you've imparted on us today, and appreciate the time that everyone on this call, all the participants, have given to this very important topic. So thank you.
Have
And
a
with
great
that,
night. And
have a
happy
great
St.
day.
Patrick's Day, right?
Have a great day.
Thanks so much.